low body fat and basically involved a ketogenic diet. Mauro Di Pasquale, who was an MD out of Canada, he wrote a book called The Anabolic Diet, very similar. Again, starts out with low carb diet. And it's excellent. There's nothing better for burning fat. But the problem is that
hello and welcome. I am Coach Castle, a certified biomechanics expert, nutritionalist, and efficiency coach. Subscribe to this channel to learn the most efficient ways to maximize your muscle growth and recovery, enhance your body, and advance your mind, all using the latest science. Welcome to Castle's Corner.
Let's talk about keto. So this is a huge thing. I don't know where this originated from, Dr. Oz or somebody, but every single, let's say, person or wannabe bodybuilder or something seems to think keto is the solution. I've had clients who were on keto for 4 or 5 years. Yeah, I know, yes. And one in particular is very, very disturbed that I said you should not be on keto for 4 or 5 years. You need to start eating some carbs and doing some other things. Would you just mind talking on keto for a minute?
Sure, not at all. Well, here's my feeling about keto. I have to admit, when I was a bodybuilding competitor, I tried many diets. As I've written in Applied Metabolics, I tried every diet known to man, you name it. Fad diets, low calorie, low fat, high carbs. And, none of them ever worked for me until I came across low carb diets. And I actually used a ketogenic, I eventually settled on a system where when I was training for a contest, I'd start with a ketogenic diet. And a lot of people don't know the ketogenic, the ketones, which are the core of the ketogenic diet, those the greater production of ketones, which is a signal that you're actually oxidizing fat to a greater extent. It takes a while. There's something called keto adaptation that takes anywhere from 5 to up to 7 weeks. That's why a lot of these studies that compared, let's say, ketogenic diets to, let's say, low fat, high carb diets showed that the low fat, higher carb diets actually led to greater fat loss because the amount of fat that they had on these diets was abnormally low, 7% fat. Who eats even vegetarians eat more fat than that.
What did they have them eating?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you offhand, but I remember it was 7% fat, and they last for like 3 weeks, and then the conclusion was the low fat, the high carb diet led to greater fat, loss than the keto. But there was a proviso. What they found though was that the ketogenic diet, the amount of fat, let's say the fat oxidation occurred faster with a ketogenic diet. But by the end of 3 weeks, supposedly the lower fat diet was superior. And then they concluded that the low fat diet was superior to ketogenic. Now, the problem with the ketogenic diet is a number of problems. First of all, from the vantage of, I just will say this though, for burning fat, it's fantastic. I don't think there's anything better. In fact, I wrote an article in Applied Metabolics. It was called the 5% Fat Diet. It was based on I talked about a book that was written by Dan Duchaine. I don't know if you ever heard of Dan Duchaine. He was called the steroid guru. He's very famous years ago. He was a self-taught expert on a couple of things. But anyway, he wrote this book on how to attain extremely low body fat and basically involved a ketogenic diet. Mauro Di Pasquale, who was an MD out of Canada, he wrote a book called The Anabolic Diet, very similar. Again, starts out with low carb diet. And it's excellent. There's nothing better for burning fat. But the problem is that for long-term effects, especially if you want to build muscle, it's not good. It's not good. It will limit the amount of muscle because, for example, if you stay on a ketogenic diet, your levels of IGF-1 start to drop, insulin-like growth factor. It's an important anabolic hormone, especially the intramuscular IGF-1. That's probably the most anabolic of all hormones, the one that's produced directly in the muscle because it stimulates the differentiation of what they call satellite cells, which are muscle stem cells needed for muscle hypertrophy or growth. And it does a number of other things. It would take a long time to go into all the details, but let's just say that the way I characterize a ketogenic diet, good for short term, not to stay on all the time. Now, myself, when I went on the ketogenic diet, I stayed on it for about 6 weeks to get the fat burning kick-started, so to speak, and it worked. By the end of 6 weeks, I was losing a lot of fat. By that point, I started to graduate. This is what Dr. Atkins of the famous Atkins diet, low carb. This is what he advised. After a couple of weeks, you start gradually adding good carbs, like, fruits and vegetables, fiber carbs, carbs that contain fiber. You start adding them back to the diet. For contests, I had to limit myself. For experimentation, I found I couldn't take more than 150 grams of carbs to continue the fat loss. Some guys can take a lot more than that. But the point is that ketogenic diet it's not good for year round. It causes other possible health effects. In other words, you have to have, it's kind of ironic because, see, the funny thing is that, there's no dietary requirement for carbohydrates. See, that's the thing. There's no dietary, contrary to what you see all over the web and articles, you have to have this amount of carbs, that. There is no dietary requirement. Humans do not need to eat carbohydrate. The reason why is the body has other ways. The ketones I mentioned, for example, ketones are alternative fuel sources that can be used in the place of glucose, especially in the brain. Ketones are actually used by the brain more efficiently as fuel than glucose itself. Ketones can be used by most body tissues, not all. It can't be used by the eye and certain parts of the nervous system. But then you have, for example, you have what they call gluconeogenesis, which is where if your body is low in glycogen, or your nervous system does need a certain amount of glucose, a minimal amount, your body can convert other substances. For example, amino acids can be converted in the liver into glucose. This is gluconeogenesis. So can lactate that you produce when you work out. That's a kind of a fatigue byproduct, if you want to call it that. And then you have the 10% of fat is glycerol. Glycerol can also be converted into glucose. For these reasons, you don't need to have any carbohydrate. In fact, there was a study, I remember I wrote about it, where they had guys lift weights, two groups. One lifted weights and had carbs after the workout. And when you have carbs after the workout, it goes right to replenishing glycogen. Because what they discovered, this is very recent, they didn't know this, this is like within the last 6 months. They used to think when you worked out with weights, that let's say you do 3 sets of curls, you burn between 24 and 48% of the glycogen content of that muscle, let's say the bicep muscle. They now know that that glycogen is stored in different compartments within the muscle. And the net effect is you burn more glycogen than was previously believed. So when you take in carbohydrates, let's say right after the workout, the body has a hierarchy. It takes those carbs and immediately sets them aside to replenish the glycogen that you used, right? But as far as, anyway, getting back to the study. So one group had carbohydrates. The guys lifted weights. One of the group had some carbohydrates. The other had no carbohydrates. And the hypothesis of the study was the group that worked out, exhausted some of their glycogen, and didn't have carbs, they would be glycogen depleted, right? They said, because they're not eating carbs, how are they going to replace? They weren't. They had as much glycogen replenishment as the others. It turns out the lactate that they produced during the workout was converted in the liver into glucose, went to the muscle, and replaced the glycogen. The enzyme converted in the muscle, glycogen synthase converted into glycogen. So, in other words, my point of that story is that it shows that there's literally no need for carbohydrates. So you could say, well, if that's true, then what's the problem with the ketogenic diet? I mean, why couldn't you stay on no carbohydrates? Well, a lot of it has to do with certain other effects it has in the body besides the carbohydrates. It's a long story, but to make a long story short, again, I believe it's good for short-term, let's say, kick-starting fat loss.